Buckle up for a new episode of Bumpaholics, the one and only podcast made to teach on all stages of the arrival of a baby, before, during, and after. Whether you're an expecting mother, have questions about fertility, difficulty with lactation, or postpartum, you're sure to learn from our experienced doulas when you listen to Bumpaholics.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to KC Women's Ministries Book Club. My name is Kristen Mason, and I am the Programs Director here with KC Women's Ministry. I'm so excited to be starting week 2 of Ghost Bellies. So if you have missed our last video for Ghost Bellies, then jump over and watch that. And starting today, we are going to be doing 4 chapters instead of our normal 3, which means we're doing chapter 4, 5, 6, and 7. Yeah, ladies, do you want to introduce yourselves real fast?
I'm Jamie Mackey. I'm the Director of Technology here at KC Women's Ministry.
Sorry, I was taking a bite right as you said that.
I waited. I timed it perfectly.
It's almost like you used to be a waitress or something. I'm Madison Hobbs. I am the Doula Operations Director with KC Women's Ministry.
Awesome. Okay, so we are going to jump right in and start talking about Ghost Bellies. And so chapter 4 really didn't talk a lot about birth stuff, which is really what we tend to focus on. It was a really important chapter for getting to know the family and getting to know, what they're going through or went through, definitely. But it was really talking about different privileges that heterosexual couples have that homosexual couples might not necessarily have, which is a fantastic topic, but not necessarily what we're really talking about, because we're really focusing on the birth aspects of the book. Did anybody do that reading and have something that they kind of want to discuss? It didn't talk about birth at all in this topic, so I don't really have any birth related questions for it, but does anybody have anything that they kind of want to just discuss so we don't completely skip the chapter?
Per usual, I did not do the reading because I feel like I am a pillar of proving that you don't have to read the book in order to come to book club. So
exactly.
But it's not why I'm not reading it, but I feel like it's important.
Basically what we do is I will have read the book very recently. Madison hasn't read the book at all, and Jamie will have read it a while back.
And that's
those are our roles.
Yeah.
We represent the different types of people that attend a book club.
The important thing is that you show up. That's the important thing.
Exactly. Okay,
yeah.
So chapter 4, great chapter, really important for understanding the background of the family and really developing empathy for the family, and it's a great chapter. Okay, chapter 5. So she starts the chapter by talking about her deciding on what type of practitioner that she wants to have, and discusses the differences between obstetricians and certified nurse midwives, and kind of goes into what that means. So if you're going to be working with an OB, they are going to have a very specific type of training that is actually pretty geared toward emergent situations. And so she kind of goes in and talking about, what it looks like to have OB care, and then versus what it looks like when you have midwifery care. So we have all worked with and we're talking specifically hospital certified nurse midwives. So some certified nurse midwives do home births, but they tend to do hospital births, not home births. They certainly can, and some do. My home birth was done by a certified nurse midwife, and I did not know the difference at the time. So definitely, but from within the scope of hospital practice, what are some differences that you guys have noticed between OB practices and nurse midwife practices?
I mean, the nurse midwife practices tend to, generalizing things, they tend to be more humanizing towards their patients. Like what I've kind of seen, I I mean, you don't always have, like, sometimes you'll have a nurse midwife practice that is very much more of the OB type of mindset, the very clinical and like, we are going to expect the worst, but type of thing. And then sometimes you have OBs that kind of act closer to what you'd expect from midwives. But now the midwives generally try and they'll look at the pregnant person as a person and like want to like let them have more autonomy and choices in their in their prenatal care and birth.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. I think, like Jamie said, kind of generalizing here, because of course there's exceptions to everything. But I think overall, midwives tend to see birth a little bit more naturally than OBs do. Sorry, the dog is trying to jump on things while I'm talking. Go lay down. OBs tend to see labor as a problem that needs to be fixed, whereas midwives see it as a process. Just again, generalizing. Obviously, not every OB views it that way, but and I think there's also kind of the idea that you're going to get more support for an unmedicated labor from a midwife than an OB, simply because of their background of training is not medical school, whereas OBs are medical school. And so
certified nurse midwives do quite a bit of medical school.
They do.
I was like, OBs, they're really what they went to school for was to be surgeons.
Essentially, yes.
That's true, which I do find incredibly interesting, for sure. And something that I find really interesting, especially the more that I doula for both midwives and OBs, and what I tell my clients when they're picking a provider is, as important as it is for you to pick a provider that supports your values and is going to be giving you the type of birth that you want, looking at hospital policy is so incredibly important, because in the end, midwifery practices that are in the hospital and OB practices in our hospital are all under that exact same policy. There's division in the staffing. There's some giveaway on different policies, but I always find it incredibly interesting that the hospital policy is still going to be the same regardless. And so there is only so much leeway that a midwife working out of a hospital can give you depending on their hospital. And so some hospitals, they really support midwifery care and they give a lot of leeway, and some of them not so much. I have run into a lot of hospitals where all they've done is change terminology to mean different things so that it sounds like they support choice and it sounds like they support these, words that other people, they come in and they say, I specifically want to, I think the most common one that I've seen is, I want to labor down. And I go, oh, definitely. We definitely support that. We want to wait until you get to 10 centimeters before you push.
Well, I would hope so.
Okay, not what that means.
No.
Things like that, which I find really interesting. And then also, of course, really interesting when you're looking at stats for OBs versus midwives, which this also comes up later in the book. I find it interesting that midwives don't tend to take high risk cases, and then OBs do. So if there's different things that where you might, what's considered risking out from being able to work with midwife for your birth. So that is another distinction when making that decision. And she does decide to go with a midwifery practice. Her first son was born at home in Germany, and she wants to relive that experience as much as possible in the book. But there's all kinds of different reasons that you might go with one type over another. And there are no wrong choices, as long as you are choosing the person who's going to support the type of birth that you are wanting to have, and they can support you as safely as possible. Okay, speaking of, let's talk about geriatric pregnancy.
I hate that term so much.
When they stamp your paper with AMA.
Ah,
Not against medical advice, advanced maternal age.
It gets
she
under
is
my skin.
So she's 45 when she's having this baby. And so she has AMA stamped on her paperwork. And since it has been 16 years since she has had a child, this is new to her. And she is very joking about it, calls herself geriatric and things like that. But this is definitely something that comes up. And she was actually afraid that her midwife wouldn't see her because she was actually considered high risk because of her age. Yeah. So let's talk about it. Madison, go.
It gets under my skin because yes, statistically the risk of bad things happening does increase with age. However, I think that it does more harm than good to be putting a label on anyone over the age of 35 as geriatric and automatically making them high risk because of their age without taking into consideration any other factors. Because it is proven that these risks do increase. And I think that some level of care does need to be increased, especially as you get, into 40, 45, the perimenopause age. It's not uncommon for women to get pregnant as they start going into menopause because of the way that the hormones shift and the way that ovulation changes and all of that. I think that, each individual person needs to have the whole picture looked at and not just, oh, you're 36 and you're pregnant. Wow. Okay. Well, we're going to treat you differently.
Right.
Because unfortunately that's what happens. You get labeled and you do get treated differently. So I think also sometimes along with that treatment that there is there's a stigma of an assumption of why this pregnancy has happened at a later age. And I've kind of seen this assumption happening on the early, the very, very young side, teenage, early 20s, and then that geriatric side of it's automatically assumed these pregnancies were unplanned and potentially unwanted. And it changes the way that providers view their patients when they have that assumption. Whether they're correct or not, it shouldn't change how they behave, but unfortunately it does.
Which is just crazy to me. I mean, we as a society are becoming, just statistically on average, older and older that we're having children. The prevalence of birth control, our sex education is getting better. People are just choosing to have children later in life, and we're living longer. So, we're doing, our childhood is extending into later and later. It's now becoming strange to well, maybe not necessarily strange, but I know I was treated very strangely for getting married in my early 20s. When I announced to the world that I was engaged at 21, everyone was like, why would you do that? It's not necessarily normal anymore. You want to be married for a while before you have kids. You would be in your 30s and 40s when you have children. or if you're choosing to have children further apart, or there's so many reasons, and it's becoming much, much more common, which just means that we technically have more and more people that are getting labeled high risk. And there's so much correlation between high monitoring and overreaction. I think people treat the problem before it exists. And there are so many studies that show that over monitoring can cause treatment before there is an issue and then causing an issue. Do you have any thoughts, Jamie?
Yeah. Just automatically putting a label on anyone's pregnancy without like considering the rest of the factors on like how healthy they are, how fit, it's like you're doing monitoring during these prenatal visits that you can determine whenever some of these risk factors might actually come into play. Like just focusing on age alone is very limiting and how you're caring for that individual. And it's just, I think that it could add so much stress to a pregnancy that would be unnecessary.
Yeah, I agree. And stress somebody out, and stress is one of the most toxic and hard things to go through on your body. You're stressing somebody out when they're carrying a baby, then who knows what their body is going to do in reaction to being stressed out. There's so much mind-body connection that is so incredibly important and needs to be respected. And, there's a lot of things in this that as she's writing, you can tell that she deals with things in all life, positive and negative, with humor. And so it's, as you read it, she's just like, they're calling me geriatric. She thinks that it's funny. But also, some people don't view it that way. And it is, frustrating when you're working with an incredibly healthy mother who happens to be in her 40s, who then gets labeled high risk and treated differently. It's very frustrating. All right, genetic testing. We're doing the fun topics for chapter 5. Genetic testing is such a hot topic right now, with the new studies that are coming out showing how incredibly inaccurate it is. Yeah. Which is just fun. Anybody have thoughts on genetic testing, or want to kind of just like explain how it works?
This is one of those topics where, as a doula, when your natural professional state has to be unbiased, and having one of these hot topics, it's sometimes hard to talk about it at all, because obviously we can talk facts and all of these things, and but I think sometimes it's hard to feel comfortable talking about our own opinions, because at least for me, I have been so ingrained to be unbiased that when we talk about these things, in other settings, it's like, I have feelings and I don't know how to express them properly because I'm not talking with a client, so I can talk about what my feelings are, but
to a certain extent.
The following media content is intended to only be an educational reference guide and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice. While KC Women's Ministry adheres to strict self-set guidelines, any advice, instructions, or information found within this media is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. KCWM makes every effort to broadcast correct information. We simply present the views based on evidence-based information. We welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. We are not sponsored by drug or device companies. By listening or viewing this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast. Under no circumstances shall KC Women's Ministry, any guests or contributors to the podcast, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of KC Women's Ministry be responsible for damages arising from the use of the podcast. Viewer discretion is advised.